If you were there when they signed the Constitution. Pages 24 to 31. Where did the delegates stay? Many delegates stayed at the Indian Queen, an inn very close to the State House, where they would be meeting. A young black servant with powdered hair and red cape met them at the door. So many delegates stayed at the Indian Queen that the landlord set aside a special dining room for them. George Washington stayed at the home of his good friend Robert Morris, who was also a delegate to the convention. Morris had helped get the money to fight the Revolution. Morris would end up in jail for his debts, but in 1787, he was one of the richest men in Philadelphia. What did they do while they waited for enough people to show up? The early arrivals had to wait until delegates from at least 7 states arrived before the convention could begin. They went to parties and taverns. Philadelphia was the largest city in America, and there was much to see and do. But mostly the early arrivals talked and argued about what to do about writing a constitution. James Madison had a plan. He had spent a whole year reading everything he could on government. For all his quiet and bookish ways, Madison was a very smart politician. He knew that if he could get his plan talked about first, other people might never get a chance to bring up their own plans. Madison's plan would come to be called the Virginia Plan. The Virginia Plan did away with the one state, one vote rule and the old Articles of Confederation. Under the Virginia Plan, the new Congress would be based on how many people lived in each state. If one state had more people than another, it would have more power. Madison's plan gave the national government real power over the states. It would be able to make war and control trade and money. When the convention finally opened, where did the delegates meet? They met at the Pennsylvania State House, or, as people were already beginning to call it, Independence Hall. It was there that Thomas Jefferson had first read his Declaration of Independence to many of the same men who were now gathering to write the Constitution. Behind the building was a garden, or mall, as it was called. The trees on the mall were small then, and they didn't give much shade in the hot sun of summer. Across the street was the city jail, a stone prison. 4 stories high, many of the people were in there because they could not pay their debts. As the delegates walked to work, the inmates of the jail would stick out their hats on long poles and beg for money. You can still visit Independence Hall today. It looks very much the same. It is a graceful red brick building with tall windows. The convention mostly held in the East Room, a comfortable room about 40 feet by 40 feet, probably more than twice the size of your classroom, but smaller than your gym. The delegates sat at round tables covered with green clothes, about 3 or 4 to a table. When you visit Independence Hall, you immediately feel that this is a good room for a debate. Not too fancy, yet filled with light from the great tall windows on each side. Finally, on Friday, May 25th, 1787, there were enough delegates to begin. Why were all white men, and they were far richer than the average person who lived at that time? Tiny Rhode Island refused to send anybody to the convention. The other 12 states elected 74 delegates, but only 55 delegates showed up. On most days, there were only 30 or 40 delegates working. The youngest delegate was Jonathan Dayton of New Jersey, who was 27. The oldest delegate was Ben Franklin, who was 81. Most of the leaders were in their early 30s. 30 of the delegates had served in the Army during the Revolutionary War. Half of them were lawyers. All of them were well known in their states. But there is no way that numbers can tell you about them. Let's look more closely at a few of them. What was Benjamin Franklin like? Benjamin Franklin couldn't resist trying out new ideas. Many of his ideas were about science. He invented the lightning rod, bifocals, and the Franklin stove. He also thought of a new political idea. He helped write the Declaration of Independence. In 1783, he helped write the peace treaty with England. By 1787, he was an old man in his 80s. He was so sick that he didn't think that he could do much at the convention, but he knew he was needed. He had to be carried to the convention in a chair on 4 long poles carried by 4 convicts who he hired from the jail for the day. It was the first sedan chair ever seen in the country. This is the end of today's lesson.